Thanks for checking out Chamber Web TV. These are one-on-one interviews with business and political leaders in our community. And have I got a surprise for you? I've got a leader in our community, a relatively new leader in our community, not brand new, but Meagan Swan is a partner with Pavey Law, and she hasn't been here a whole long time. So, Meagan, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, how long you've been here, and then I'm going to ask you a little trick question afterwards.
Okay, well, thank you, Greg, and thank you for having me today. I am a lawyer, and I practice litigation at Pavey Law, and I've been with them since 2015. I have been practicing law since 2008, and I was a partner at a firm in Toronto. But my husband is here in Cambridge, so that was the
You got dragged down the 401, did you?
Pretty much. Now I have a backyard, some trees, so you know, that's kind of nice. And definitely well connected to the community now. So that was a great pleasure to come to Cambridge and actually be part of a community rather than sitting in a office building and just basically working away.
Yeah.
So it's a nice balance here in Cambridge, especially to be a great part of a great team at Pavey Law. And they are very devoted to the community and community events, so that's why we've been connected with the chamber quite for some time.
Yeah, we're big fans of Pavey Law.
Yeah, we love.
Our past chair is one of your partners, Stephen Whitavine.
Yeah,
and
so
we've always had that really connected relationship with Pavey Law, and we've really certainly appreciated it. But you know, you've moved from concrete and asphalt to
exactly
a little bit of concrete and asphalt, but more green. How do you enjoy Cambridge?
You know what? We moved into a house which is surrounded by a neighborhood of friends and colleagues. So we really lucked out. I'm only about 1.5 kilometers away from the office, which is fantastic. We have 2 small children, and they go to the school 3 houses up from our house. So it's a really big change.
Perfect world almost.
It's you know what? It is a perfect world, and our neighborhood is our second family. So it's been a fantastic move. My work, really, the substance of my work hasn't really changed from coming from Toronto to Cambridge. So, you know, I had a lot of people ask me, you know, you're moving from, you know, Bay Street, Toronto to Cambridge. And, you know, the types of files that I work with, the types of business people that I work with are consistent. And so I get to enjoy having a great work-life balance and still have the type of files and clients that I was enjoying in Toronto.
Business is business, and I think a lot of people, you know, we look at Toronto as being this big corporate giant and Bay Street and all that kind of stuff, but you know, and that's what we really want to talk about. When you get down to the nuts and bolts of it, it doesn't matter whether you have a small business in Cambridge or a small business in Toronto.
Exactly.
You're faced with the exact same challenges and need exactly the same advice.
Same issues, might be on a little smaller scale, but it's the same exact issues that companies and businesses face.
We want to talk a little bit, Meagan. You were kind enough to offer your services on a panel discussion that we had prior to Bill 148 becoming law. Now here we sit in January 2018 when Bill 148 is law. There were some subtle changes, some interesting changes. I think the automotive industry got a really good coup out of it because they seem to have that back door into the Premier's office. But nonetheless, we're really here talking about small businesses. And I think, you know, from your perspective, that's who you like to help, that's who you like to work with. And they're faced with a myriad of changes and challenges right now that, you know, some of them are saying to me, at least on the phone, oh, this is impossible, I don't know how I'm going to deal with this. And I'm telling them, trying to reaffirm to them, yes, I don't necessarily agree with everything either, but you have to figure it out.
Yes, it is what it is.
Yes.
It's come into force. Not all of the changes or not all of the proposed changes have come into force yet, but the financial impact ones have. So the minimum wage, which is a quite a big bump, has come into effect, as well as the change in vacation pay for anyone over who's been there for 5 years or more. And as well as the personal emergency leave. So not a lot of businesses have had paid sick days or emergency leave days. And so this is something that's, it will be a financial impact if they anticipate that all their employees will take those 2 paid days. And also scheduling wise, they will have to be cognizant that their employees have up to 10 days in the year to be off.
Yes.
Which is, you know, for an employee, that's quite a nice benefit to have.
It's actually 2
right?
weeks vacation.
That's true, but only 2 of those are paid, right? So it is only 2 paid, but it gives an employee the flexibility to look after any childcare issues, their own personal issues. But on the flip side, to an employer, having to schedule around the unknown days off is quite a challenge.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I was concerned a little bit with that is the vast majority of minimum wage earners,
Yes.
about 80% of them, actually, yeah, about 80% of them are actually in two income households. So they're probably the extra little bit of money maybe to pay for that vacation once a year or to, you know, do some renovations or whatever. You know, their dependency on having that regular paycheck isn't necessarily there like a single person who's got to have that paycheck. I would probably venture to say that those 10 days are going to be used.
You know what? Probably they will be. You know, I have employers, clients who already have something similar to what the proposed changes already provide. So they have in their employment policies some forgiveness for personal days or sick days, and you know what? People take them. People use them. So it is something that's probably a real possibility that those full 10 days will be used.
Yeah, I think it, you know, that's a minor hiccup. Probably, you know, those small business owners that are watching this are probably saying, I'm not worried about that. I'm more worried about the $14, soon to be $15, because I think that's what made the big headlines. But you and I have been talking a little bit about this, and you know, yes, that's a known. That's a really big flag that's waved out there because you're going from maybe $11.60 or $12 an hour all the way up to 14 right away. But really, that's only one segment of the changes that have been made that small businesses have to really consider when they're looking at their overall business.
Yes, and you know what? Those are the minimum wage hike is the one that you see in the news all the time,
right?
And employers probably haven't taken a look at all of the proposed changes, and one of them that is significant. I think will be significant for a lot of employers is this equal pay for equal work provision.
Yes.
And now that comes in effect of April 1st of 2018. So in a couple months, if someone is working part-time for an employer and they believe that a full-time person, they do the same job but just have different hours, if they believe that the full-time person is earning more, they have the ability to request knowledge of that pay to make sure that they're being paid equally with someone who's working full time. So employers,
that could be huge because sometimes that part-time job, it's a benefit. It's what the person wanted, so they're willing to take a little bit less money to only have to work 2 or 3 days a week. Now they're going to have to be compensated for the same way as the individual working 40 hours a week if they're doing the exact same job.
That's the thing, yeah. If they are doing the exact same job, there are some exceptions to that rule, which it's going to be tricky. We haven't seen this rule come into play yet, so the interpretation of the exceptions has yet to be determined. However, the exceptions are seniority, merit-based, so and making sure that they have the same qualifications. So if you're actually truly looking at apples versus apples, then they have to be paid the same. But the exceptions do allow for some variances. But that's all going to be down to interpretation. So you have an employee thinking that they're on the same level in qualification and seniority as one person, and the employer has a different view. So that's where I tend to get calls in those scenarios where. And I've been urging my employer clients to really look at the employees that they have, whether or not they have any temporary employees, maybe covering a maternity leave, making sure that they're paying that person the same wage or salary as what they were paying the person who is on the leave. Because businesses often do
Oh, for sure.
try to fill a vacancy if it's only a 1 year at a lower rate, because they're still having to cover the benefits and other things that they would have provided for that full-time employee.
Yeah.
So
And they're always thinking too, well, that full-time regular employee has been with me for 5 or 10
Yes.
years. They know me inside and out. They know my business inside and out. This person coming in doesn't know me. There might be some extra training. There might be some other attention that needs to be provided, so I can pay them a little less. But that's not necessarily the case.
not necessarily the case if you're comparing everyone on an equal basis.
I think, yeah, that and I think one conversation that I had with an employer, we talked exactly about that. And for some reason or another, this employer was always fixated on the minimum wage thing.
Okay.
I said, no, it doesn't, that person that, could be a $30 an hour person, you can't pay somebody else $25 an hour for doing that exact same job with the exact same qualifications if they're only working part-time. You have to pay them $30 an hour. And that scared them.
Well, and that's the big impact. So, we talk about this going from our previous minimum wage up to 14. Think about across the board if you have 50 employees and having to make sure that they're paid equal. So if you're going to have to bump someone up from 26 to 34, that's a huge increase there.
If you just want to keep them.
That's true.
Right? So
That's
now
true.
you've got this one employee, key employee, could be really good, maybe your best employee, never uses all the sick days, all of those kinds of things. They look at another job opportunity, and then now you're trying to keep them. You got to be mindful, well, if I give that individual a $4 an hour raise, I got to give the rest of them a $4 an hour raise. And these are really important things to look at.
Yes, and I anticipate that there will be a lot of issues ahead, where the ministry is hiring all these additional enforcement officers, and they will be having to investigate these complaints. So if an employee does come to an employer and request knowledge of whether or not they're being paid equally, they have a very easy ability to call up the ministry and file a complaint, and that will be reviewed. And what you don't want as an employer is to open the door on that review to discover that there are other issues in your workplace. Right?
Yes, it's bad enough when you get the knock on the door from the inspector. I suspect Meagan Swan's going to be really, really busy.
Well, you know what? I've already had employer clients call me just on the new rules that have come in place in January. Yeah. The personal emergency leave. Now you're not allowed to ask for a doctor's note, and a lot of my clients have policies where they say after 2 days of being absent, they require a doctor's note, right? And that's gone. You can't ask that. So after the 10 days you can, but before that you can't. So really, employers have to look at their policies to see whether or not their policies are actually in line with the changes. And if not, they need to update them. So the one employer that I had, they were concerned that someone was off for more than a week due to concussion symptoms.
Yes.
And this person wanted to come back to work. But my employer client, it's transportation. So they didn't want to have this guy come back to work if he wasn't
not
medically able to, right? When you're
yes.
having these concussion symptoms. And so
good reason.
Right, you have to make sure that you also run a safe workplace for both the employee and others. So it was a debate of whether can I ask them for a doctor's note? And my response is, well, you have to give them the leave and not question the leave. But if they want to return to work, and you need to ensure a safe return to work, then the doctor's note applies. So there's all these little tweaks when you have to consider what the new rules say and how to actually apply them in practice.
I suspect there'll be all kinds of challenges from all kinds of employees for all kinds of circumstances. And, maybe like a lot of other broad sweeping legislation like this, things will have to be tweaked as it goes along, because we'll find out that it's impossible to operate, given the clear black and white lettering of the law.
And we've seen some tweaks as the bill was proposed in the different readings, because they had the one about the 48 hours cancellation of shifts, and local businesses here, especially one like a ski resort, right? The weather dependent, and though during the process of creating this new legislation, they decided they had to think about, well, what if it was weather dependent, where an employee's work is they're only working if the weather's right.
Yeah.
So at a ski hill, if there's no snow, they're not working. And you don't know whether or not you're going to get snow.
Yeah.
And so sometimes that 40 hours doesn't really work.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
there have been changes, additional exceptions that have been included within the law, but you're still there. I can imagine there'll be another situation where exceptions would apply,
Yeah.
and it would not be fair to the employer to have to, pay someone for that time if they weren't able to meet the 48-hour.
Yeah, we had Bill
cancellation.
Crichton from Chicopee
Yes.
on our radio show talking about the effects of the impact of Bill 148. And what a lot of people don't know is Chicopee Ski Hill's a not-for-profit
Yeah, it's not-
organization. It's no different than the Chamber,
Yes.
except it has 500 employees, where we don't have 500 employees. But it's a big operation, but really, obviously, weather dependent. This is,
Of course.
it needs good snow. He used the example of having 60 instructors out there in March for March break when they have lessons, and they've got hordes of kids coming out there, and all of a sudden it's pouring rain, because we can get lots of rain in March, and he has to cancel it, but he doesn't know that that's going to happen until the morning of.
Yeah.
Well, how can he give 48 hours notice, and he's got 60 trained ski instructors out there? That's really expensive.
Yeah, so thankfully over the course of the readings and people's, the public's input into the legislation, there has been this weather-dependent type of exception. But I'm sure there's going to be other scenarios where we haven't actually thought about how that will work in practice.
Yep. Most small businesses, Megan, and you know this. First of all, your first recommendation is, if you've got a policy and procedures manual, have it reviewed,
Yes.
go through it, have someone look it over to make sure that it applies to the current standards under the Employment Standards Act. And if you don't have one,
Well, I always say,
you can't fly by the seat of your pants.
well, I know,
anymore
but you know what? A
because-
lot of small businesses do, because
I know.
sometimes they don't have the resources to create the policies and have the policies reviewed to make sure that they're actually in accordance with the minimums under the Employment Standards Act. So the first thing is, I always say, you need to have a policy guideline so that all of your employees know that you're going to treat them on a consistent basis,
Yep.
in a fair basis, and set out exactly what it is that the employer has responsibilities for and what the employee has responsibilities for. The second thing is, have an employment contract. I cannot believe how many employers will hire employees without an employment contract. And whenever there's
even a minimum wage worker.
I know it's actually astonishing to me. It doesn't take that much time to get a good employment contract put together. It will spell out exactly what they're entitled to for any leaves, a vacation, and it'll also tell them what they're entitled to upon termination. And it's always when things go south that an employer comes in, and it's at that time I say, okay, well, what did you agree to when you hired them?
Yeah.
Oh, we don't have a contract. Well, then that kind of opens the door for the employee to claim a higher amount
whatever they want.
A higher amount of notice than what is the minimum under the Employment Standards Act. So if you don't have an employment agreement with a termination provision that sets out what the employer anticipates to provide to them, and it must be at least the minimum under the Employment Standards Act, then you're opening yourself to a greater liability for that employee.
I remember speaking to someone, and they said, even if you put in the minimum that's there, that's the foundation of where everybody should start. It doesn't necessarily mean in a challenge that it's always going to be the minimum, but if you don't have a minimum set, if you don't have something that the individual is signed for, then the door is wide open for them to suggest whatever they think is appropriate, and you to try and defend that when you gave them nothing in the beginning.
And they will.
Yeah,
because
for sure.
I act for employees and employers. So if an employee comes in to me and they said that they've been terminated, and I ask them where their contract is, there is no contract. Okay, so you've been employed there for 12 years, and you're getting the maximum under the Employment Standards Act, which is typically just the termination pay of 8 weeks. 8 weeks is sometimes not enough.
Yeah.
And so I'll advise the employee, okay, well, you know what, you could get notice between 1 week to 4 weeks per year of service. So you're going from the 8 weeks, the minimum, to a potential liability of having to pay an employee between 1 to 4 weeks per year of service.
Yeah.
And that's significant.
Oh, for sure.
So when I put my employer counsel hat on, I'm making sure that they have an employment contract that limits the employee to only the minimums under the Employment Standards Act.
Yeah.
If they need to terminate that employee later on, they are pretty much guaranteed that they only have to pay under the Employment Standards Act. If they want to give that employee more, that's up to them at that point in time. But at least you know from day one that your liability is capped at a particular amount. You don't want to go, think back 15 years later going, oh shoot, I now have to let this employee go and have this potentially significant liability.
I think most employers maybe get comfortable and say, well, if I've had an employee for 15 years, I'm never going to have to get rid of them. They're good employees because, but things change.
Things change.
Right?
And your business
maybe they
changes.
don't adapt.
Or maybe you need to downsize.
Yeah.
Right? Maybe they're too expensive. Maybe you need to go from 10 employees to 5 employees.
Yeah.
But having to give them all reasonable notice, which would be above and beyond what the Employment Standards Act, that's significant.
I have an employer here in town who's taking a little different tact with this. He's actually getting rid of some senior management because one senior manager will pay for 3 or 4 frontline people that he really requires for customer service perspective. But he's still looking at 3 or 4 months that it's going to cost him in severance because they've been around for 8 or 10 years and making and in a senior management role. So it's very costly. And if he had not had contracts in place to determine that, even though he's being a little more generous with them, who knows what they could have got? Who knows? And they're happy getting what they've got because they signed for something else.
Of course, right? And the other thing, sometimes I'll say there is a possibility of giving working notice. So working notice is sufficient notice under the Employment Standards Act. But who wants to give an employee 6 months working notice? How well do you think they'll be productivity-wise, morale-wise?
Yeah.
So when an employer has the ability to do that, to have the working notice, but in reality, it's not one of the
I've
options.
never seen it work real well.
No.
It just doesn't, especially if it's a long time, if it's 6 or 8 weeks and you're giving someone 6 or 8 weeks notice, they're not a productive employee. That's for sure. So, but it's a huge challenge. I think, Meagan, the best advice we could, especially small business owners, because it's not until you get to that, medium size that you really start worrying about all this stuff. But if you have a clear understanding of it when you're small, that's one of the first moves that you do as your company grows, is you continually improve and upgrade your policy and procedurals manual so that it adapts to the business, but also adapts to the employee environment. So. Everybody should give you a call.
Well, thank you, Greg. You know what?
I don't know whether you have enough time to do them all, but
no, it's the employment contract that I always stress that it's so important, and you have to have the contract signed before the person starts. So it's not something that you can really go back on. There are ways, but you have to provide the employee an incentive or some consideration for signing a contract. So you got to start from day one. Whenever we take on a new employee, get them to sign a contract, set out exactly what it is, and that contract will be adapted based on the new requirements under the Employment Standards Act.
Exactly. Yeah, I think it's really good advice. And I think the other thing is, especially if an employer is hiring people all of the same skill set, get some help in setting out a really good employment contract. You can duplicate it and use it for 30 or 40 employees if you want. But
I often say each employee is different, but yes, in certain circumstances, an employment contract will cover off the majority of the employees if they are on the same.
Well, you certainly want to deal with if you're hiring managers or supervisors. That's a different. There's a few more responsibilities that they would have than the frontline worker too, but
I'm sure I have lots of employer clients who have taken my contract and just use it for everyone.
Run it through the copy machine.
Exactly. But whenever
get everybody to sign.
Yeah, whatever I send one, I'll say, this contract is for this employee.
Yeah.
So, but whatever else you want to do with that, that's up to you.
It's always good advice, Meagan,
Yes.
and I think it would certainly, I'd love for them to all give you a call because you've taken your time here to come and talk to me. But
thank you.
But they should get some professional advice. It doesn't matter who they deal with; they need to get some professional advice.
Well, yeah, I think especially when you're bringing on new employees, and if there are concerns with the new legislation,
Yep.
specifically the equal pay for equal work that comes in April, that's going to be a big issue for some people, as well as the next year. Next year is more of the substantive issues where the interpretation can be a little bit off regarding the shift cancellation and those ones. So it's going to be.
I wonder how much the new inspectors will be out on the road in this first year or not. We all know the Tim Hortons story, the Ron Joyce family. It seems like the premier just wants to unleash all 175 of the new ones and get out there and check everybody out. But, I really think that, that there's an education process that's going to happen first.
There is, and employers like Tim Hortons, we're trying to cut the fringe benefits off that aren't required. So, you hear in the news about them taking away the paid breaks. Well, the Employment Standards Act doesn't require employers to pay breaks, right? So it's not reducing what they're required to do. It's taking away something that was a perk. It was a perk. And if you think about that perk, they were paying, for a half-hour paid break, that's approximately $6 per person per shift. So they're trying to offset the increase in wage with that reduction.
I think, and most Tim Hortons provided that.
Yes.
And I think there was a study that came out. It was something like the average Tim Hortons. It's about $240,000 a year in costs for Bill 148. Well, I know a number of Tim Hortons owners.
Yes.
They would love to have $250,000 profits out of their operation at the end of the year. So, there's small businesses like that are front-end loaded, I think, with a lot of minimum wage employees that they've been giving some perks to because it's hard to keep people there. They're continually interviewing staff and hiring staff. So, I think we got to cut them a break. So I made a passion plea that I was doubling my daily dose of Tim Hortons.
Oh, really?
Yes, to try and help them get over this hurdle.
There you go.
But we should be. Those of us who are a little more fortunate should probably think about those small businesses and try and support them. It's tough,
especially the ones that have a majority are on minimum wage.
Yeah,
because it is a huge hit.
Yeah, for sure. Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you want any more expert advice, I don't want to give you Meagan's phone number so that you can call her at home at night, but certainly give her a call at Pavey Law. She'd love to answer your questions and certainly love to help you out with any legal requirements around your small business. And we certainly appreciate, Meagan, for you to come in today.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you.